I call to order the Fire Code Board of Appeals meeting for February 4th, 2020. If we start with the roll call, please.
Sure. Miller?
Here.
Beckman?
Here.
Verplank?
Here.
Okay, we do not have any additions or deletions to the agenda, so that will move forward as it stands. Can you get a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting of January 27th, 2020?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of January 27, 2020. Second.
Any discussion? Okay, are those in favor of approving the minutes of January 27th?
Yes.
Say yes. I'm not very good at that. No one's opposed. So we'll move into public comment on agenda items only, limiting each commenter to 3 minutes. So does anyone want to give public comment?
Rebecca Brunt, Lake Town resident. I've just given you a copy of my remarks, which I'd like to have read into the record. And thank you for taking my comments. I'm speaking today in support of the Saugatuck Township Fire Department and Chief Janik, in whom the township, as we said last week, the citizens of Saugatuck and the public have placed their trust to minimize community risks as they pertain to fire suppression and control. Mr. Padnos and Boscraft are attempting to build a very complex project without sufficient fire protection. In fact, they've already moved forward without approved fire protection. This puts the current homeowners, the Kesslers and the Haydrick families, at risk, our firefighters at risk, and the township at risk. Over the past 2 years, Chief Janik has repeatedly stated that he wants to work with the owners, with Mr. Boscraft and the Boscraft lawyer, to do things the right way. Peg and Jeff Padnos, along with Scott Boscraft and his attorney, still intend to pull water from the proposed boat basin. There are several issues with this scenario. One, the boat basin has not been approved. There are many who think that the boat basin will not be approved, or who don't think the boat basin will be approved. If it is approved, it's highly unlikely to be completed within the next 12 months. And that's if there are no appeals of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permit from the 3 local tribal nations. Pulling water from standpipes in the boat basin is still at risk of issues with zebra mussels, plastic bags, and other items that could restrict the flow or harm the piping. At this point, if the property owners, Peg and Jeff Padnos, want to build any more structures and to depend upon the boat basin for permanent water supply, they need to instruct Mr. Boscraft to put the horse back before the cart. By this we mean, before any more structures are built, ensure the boat basin is permitted and built, or separate the plans to adjust to no boat basin. Make the proper investment in fire safety equipment per the Saugatuck Township Fire Department's requirements, installing the fire district's viable solution of a UL-listed fire pump, fire protection mains, and hydrants within 400 feet of every dwelling. Even the previous developer, Aubrey McClendon, had planned to provide this level of fire protection, just as the developer at Dune Grass has done. Anything less should not be considered nor tolerated. Thank you.
I got a question for you, if I can. Can I? The Kesslers and Haydrick's family, are they currently on lot 2 and 3? Is that what out there?
That's what the record states, sure.
Well, I'm not sure what one, but they're currently living out in that development,
They're
correct?
listed as owners of those 2 houses on the beach.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, we'll move into unfinished business. Letter A, considering the appeal of North Shores of Saugatuck LLC. We'll start with presentations by the applicant or the designee, followed by presentations by the fire code official or designee. If they choose, they don't need to do that. Then we'll move into questions among the board, discussion among the board, and action by the board. So, Carl, do you guys have anything you want to share?
Yes, thank you.
as we get into this second round of arguments and debate regarding this review, I wanted to step back and kind of frame the issue and the scope of this whole inquiry, because I think last time we got a little bit off topic and off track. The fire chief, in the review that's been denied, is preventing my client from constructing a single-family home on lot 615 unless my client installs hydrants within 400 feet of the house that are capable of drafting at least 2,000 gallons per minute, a volume that, according to the latest field test reports that we've been provided, not a single hydrant in the township is capable of drafting. Under the township ordinance, you, as the Board of Appeals, are given the authority and the responsibility to determine whether the demands of the fire chief that he's placing on an owner of a single-family lot are supported by the applicable code and regulations. You are not here to offer personal opinions on the type of water supply you think the developer should put in. You're not here to review and critique the developer's decisions. You're not here to express agreement or disagreement with the consent decree. You're here with a single purpose: to use your own experience and training in firefighting to determine what the applicable codes and regulations require for a single-family home proposed on lot 15. And once you've done that, to determine whether the fire chief is demanding something more than what is required. For purposes of lot 15 and for this appeal, the Board of Appeals, you three, are now the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. Use your experience and apply the code. To be honest, I'm a little confused as to why we're still debating this issue of whether NFPA 1142 applies or not. Is it because you're uncertain about whether lot 15 is in a rural or suburban area? Because that definition is very clear. Rural is defined as those areas with populations less than 500 per square mile. Suburban is defined as those areas with population densities of between 500 and 1,000. Saugatuck Township, which I've confirmed with the township manager today, is at less than 130 persons per square mile. There's nothing left to debate on this factor. Or is it that you're uncertain about whether lot 15 is served by a municipal water supply system? Because unless you intentionally delete words from the code, that definition is also crystal clear. The determining factor is whether the lot is serviced by a municipal-style water system. Lot 15 is not serviced by a municipal-style water system. Again, there's nothing left to debate on either of these points and the application of NFPA 1142. Now, it is concerning that when speaking to you about statements made and representations to you by a public official, I feel compelled to caution you to not be misled. But on these 2 points, on the application of 1142, do not be misled by what the fire chief has said to you. Despite the clear language of NFPA 1142 indicating that the term rural is defined by population density per mile, the fire chief is attempting to argue that lot 15 should not be considered rural because it has electric and gas and internet service. That argument is misleading, and I'm trusting that you guys can look past it. On the other factor, despite the clear language of both IFC and NFP 1142, that the determining factor is whether there is a water supply system, the fire chief has deliberately and intentionally deleted a word from that definition. I trust you understand the gravity of permitting a public official to simply delete words from ordinances or codes when those words don't fit with the official's agenda. NFPA 1142, the full name of which is the Standard on Water Supplies for Suburban and Rural Firefighting. That standard applies to Lot 15. The only question that should be up for debate is whether the two existing dry hydrants satisfy the minimum requirements of 1142 for an alternative water supply. That's the question. Now, before I get repeat comments from some of you questioning, well, why wouldn't the developer want to do something more than the minimum required? I will say this: that is not your concern. You are not here to second guess the developer's decisions. You're not here to offer opinions on what you would do if you were the developer, or what you would want if you were going to purchase a lot in the development. You are here to apply the requirements of 1142, which has been incorporated by reference into the official township ordinances of Saugatuck Township. And once you do that, your second role is to determine whether the dry hydrants meet those minimum requirements. Now, a few preliminary observations about NFPA 1142. First, the rigid water supply requirements of IFC 507, such as a fire hydrant every 400 feet and so forth, those do not apply when considering a lot in a rural area. This is clear because NFPA 1142 considers streams and ponds to be an acceptable alternative water supply. This would not be the case if IFC 507 applied and a hydrant was required every 400 feet. NFPA 1142 considers tanker trucks and portable drop tanks to be an acceptable water supply. This would not be the case if IFC 507 applied and a hydrant was required every 400 feet. NFPA 1142 considers swimming pools and cisterns to be acceptable alternative water supplies. This, too, would not be the case if there had to be a hydrant every 400 feet. Second, the water flow tables contained in IFC B 105, which is where the fire chief gets the 200 gallons per minute, does not apply, because two sections before it, in B 103, we are directed to take the flow rate calculations contained in NFPA 1142 when considering a lot in a rural area. Once we take that exit ramp to NFPA 1142, those are the flow rate calculations that are applicable. And NFPA 1142 is very clear on fire flow calculations. It's not subjective. It's not open to creative interpretation. Section 4.2.1 contains the formula. Table 4.6.1 contains the results table. You do the formula, you get the number, you cross-reference the table, you get the total gallons, and you get the flow rate. Again, this calculation under 1142 is not subjective, and it's not open to creative interpretation. So can the two existing hydrants supply the required flow rate? Well, I've shown you before what this calculation is, and I'm not going to, again, it's in the material submitted. The total gallons, as calculated under NFPA 1142, 9,861 gallons, with a flow rate of 500 gallons per minute. The dry hydrants that exist can easily meet these requirements. They're connected, after all, and they draw directly from the Kalamazoo River, which for all intents and purposes is an unlimited water supply. So 9,861 gallons should not be an issue. The dry hydrants are also capable of providing water to Lot 15 at a rate of more than 500 gallons per minute, using one pumper at the dry hydrants and a fairly short, large diameter hose leg. The fire chief does not dispute this. Now, Section 4.1.3 of NFPA 1142 does allow the authority having jurisdiction, which is now you as the Board of Appeals, to adjust these minimum requirements for particular conditions. Quote, particular conditions, okay? So do that based on your own firefighting experience and training. If you feel it's necessary, make sure when you do that to explain why you think there's an increase that's required from the minimum standards based on an FPA 1142 calculation. Now, the fact that the home on lot 15 will be, as the fire chief has described it, a McMansion, does not constitute a particular condition. The NFPA 1142 formula already takes into the size of the home into account as it calculates the water requirements. The fact that the home on lot 15 may have modern furniture in it is not a particular condition. Most new homes will have new furniture in them. Lot 15 has no exposure hazards, is not on a wooded lot, and it's bordered by water on one side. What makes the home North Shore is proposing on lot 15 different from a typical 5,000 square foot house? Can you identify enough particular conditions that would make this home different from a typical 5,000 square foot house in the township to justify a 10% increase over these numbers? Can you identify those particular conditions? What about a 20% increase? How about a 50% increase? I would submit to you that it would take some extremely strong circumstances and very articulatable differences from other homes in the township to justify a 400% increase to the NFPA 1142 calculated water supply that the fire chief is demanding. NFPA 1142 gives you the calculation. If you believe an adjustment is necessary, make that adjustment and explain with particularity the reason for that adjustment. In reviewing the presentation materials and the arguments made, it should be pretty obvious that there is a side agenda here. This appeal involves the review of a single home on a single lot. And yet I've lost count of the number of times we've heard the term pressurized water system, or the number of times the fire chief has advocated for a pressurized water system throughout the entire development. That's not what the appeal is about. This is not a debate about whether the developer should put in a pressurized water system. Essentially, the issue comes down to either the two existing 6-inch dry hydrants that are less than 800 feet away, or new 8-inch hydrants that are 400 feet closer. Right? That's really what this comes down to. Has the fire chief sufficiently explained why dry hydrants within 400 feet of a home are sufficient, but dry hydrants within 800 feet are not? Because that specific requirement of distance is not anywhere in NFPA 1142. Now maybe you're thinking back to those two response timeline slides. Or if you're thinking, well, there's some justification. He showed us that, remember those two slides, they had the fire flames licking up from the bottom. Here's one scenario with the existing, and here's the other scenario, and we want to avoid this one. That's why we need this new system. Now these slides, presumably then, if they were on point, would show the difference in response time between what's currently there and what the fire chief is requiring. 400 feet versus 800 feet, right? wrong. That's not the comparison the fire chief showed you. He showed you a timeline, one hooking up to the dry hydrants. He showed you a second timeline for responding if the developer installs a fully pressurized water system throughout the development. Those are the two scenarios he's providing you. That is not your decision, nor is it his. Originally, it was the fire chief's duty to properly apply NFPA 1142 to the Lot 15 site plan that the homeowner is proposing. From our perspective, he failed to do so, opting instead to deny the permit based on inflated numbers in an attempt to force the developer into installing a complete pressurized system that he thinks should be put in. Fortunately, the township ordinance contains an appeal mechanism which provides for the fire chief's decision to be reviewed by a Board of Appeals, this Board of Appeals, consisting of 3 individuals qualified by experience, training, to independently interpret and apply the applicable code and regulations. Properly apply 1142, and you will conclude that the existing dry hydrants meet the requirements for an alternative water supply in a rural area, and that the chief is demanding more than what is required. Thank you.
Okay, time for presentation by the fire code official or their designee. Okay.
Darn computers.
And we need one of those wireless things like he has.
Where's Eric?
Back there somewhere.
He's back
There we
there
go.
somewhere.
Get him done.
Okay. Welcome, Board of Appeals. We'll get started.
I'm sure there's another word that's gotta get.
I want to start out by saying to each of the Board of Appeals members, I'm going to take a little different approach. I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. You do what you think is best. We'll support that decision. So I want to get that out of the way, okay? Before I start, I want to comment on the single hydrant not making 2,000 gallons per minute. Carl, when they say, he's correct. He's correct. What wasn't mentioned was we hook up 2 hydrants together to achieve that flow. Just like we hook up 2 dry hydrants to achieve higher flow. So I'd like to point that out. So these are the items we're going to cover. Listed on there. I'm not going to go through them. So let me start out by saying there was a lot of reference at the last meeting to Deputy Chief Burnham. I'll refer to him as Chief Burnham. And we reached out to him and asked him some specific questions, and his comments, the email is complete there. We wanted to reference some points of interest. We didn't cherry pick anything or try to extract certain things, just comments. We actually gave him our criteria and said, here, you evaluate our area. So let me start out with some of his comments. It's quite interesting that my article is being used for reference in this case. As we both know, local conditions can vary significantly and affect required fire flow for development. I think these are important things for you to remember because there was such a benchmark with what his criteria was. My experience is primarily with single-family structures and agricultural buildings in a hilly, rural environment. As another point of interest, Chief Burnham has a population of 1,000. It responds with an engine and a tanker and with 3,200 gallons per minute. Total gallons, I'm sorry. 3,200 total gallons in the tanker. What he can't put out, he leaves up to mutual aid. Different areas, different interpretations of rural. Please keep that in mind. So, Chief references concedes 500 gallons per minute, 9,000 plus gallons of water is appropriate for an incipient stage fire. You know, incipient stage is a small fire. We call incipient stage a room and contents fire. Okay. We're prompt notification of the fire department and there's no delayed response. We all know the volume of second homes that we have. We've pointed out to you numerous times that's a concern of ours, delayed response. Another very profound statement. My experience with dry hydrants and with long supply lines are that they take considerable time and resources to get set up. Usually time and resources are in short supply. We've brought that up several times. On paper, they may sound good, but in practicality, most any fire can be fought with dry hydrants or long supply lines end up being essentially a total loss. This is the same person that was referenced before as 500 to 1,000 gallons per minute. Again, may be useful for exposure protection, but you're stepping outside of what I would consider rural. Chief continues on. This is really interesting. The best level of fire protection, in his opinion, is automatic sprinklers. We've been trying to advocate for that for over 2 years with the developer and the builder. And he goes on to say that this fire protection system is not only for the neighbors and for exposures. Think of the 2007 fire that we had. It's also for the point of origin, the fire itself. So he agrees that the state of fire flow and the quantity of water would be inadequate to prevent fire between structures. We don't know what's going to happen. We looked at the one, lot 15, it showed 20-foot clearance, then another 20-foot clearance to the west. The thing of it is, whether it's 50 feet or 100 feet, we fought fires where we had extension onto the next fire, especially when you consider the fact that when the wind comes out of the west or northwest, the wind funnels down the river. So the ones that particularly along the river are very vulnerable. Not an exaggeration, not an embellishment, it's experience. That's what we've had.
So in the end, it's left up to the AHJ which code to apply and how we determine what we need for adequate water supply needs. And so whether we use the IFC, NFPA 1142, or the International Urban Wildland Interface Code, the end result will still be the same. We chose the IFC because it is fully compatible with both the Michigan Residential Code and the Michigan Building Code. They dovetail together quite well. And keep in mind that all of these codes were created and written as a result of past tragedies. So our goal in applying these codes uniformly is to prevent these tragedies from occurring in our community.
So consistency and uniformity. The IFC has a really stellar checklist that we use. We do that because it's part of our community risk reduction plan. We try to look at everything in the same view, the same perspective. And this allows us to do it, and that's what we've done. We don't deviate. We don't use an NFPA 1142 checklist. We use IFC, and that is what we follow, and that's what we followed since I've been here for 7 years, and we follow it in my first 10 years. So we want to emphasize to you, that's why we select IFC and not 1142. Important to point out to the board that fire departments exist not only to respond, but they exist to prevent and reduce the effects of fire and the occurrence and the consequences of them. That's why we're here. We could be reactionary. I've been here 19 years. This fire department has been always proactive. We're trained for that. We're geared for that. You're trained for the worst. That's why we try to prepare for the worst. So the fire department, or the plan review process, is very intrinsic with you know, risk and reducing things, and I really feel that that's the way we have to look at this, and that's what we'll continue to do. To do so without IFC contradicts past practices and community risk reduction. It just is a contrary direction to go in.
So, back to the IFC again. As you've seen this before, it is very clear that a hydrant is required within 400 feet of any building constructed within the jurisdiction. And whether that's a pressurized main off of the KLSWA system, or the developer provides on-site mains and fire hydrants, that is all available to be required by the fire code official. As the developer's attorney referenced earlier, B1033, this is out of the fire code where it allows NFPA 1142 to be utilized. However, it does not say it shall be utilized, nor does it mandate the use of it. It is left up to us as the fire code official to choose if we're going to use the IFC, NFPA 1142, or the IWUIC. And again, we chose the IFC because it dovetails the best with all of the other codes.
As we mentioned, the fire code official is the authority having a jurisdiction in our coverage area. Much like Chief Burnham alluded to, different areas require different strategies and tactics, resources, and equipment. I don't tell him how to fight a fire. He can't tell me how to fight a fire because he doesn't know how to do it. So I know the geography, I know the wind conditions, I know the snow conditions. You take all those elements into effect. I have that advantage. That's why I am the authority having jurisdiction. Okay, if you want to use 1142, all right, 1142, minimum requirements are subject to increase by very much the same things that we have echoed previously. Local conditions, it allows for deviations. Big houses, remote location spells certain conditions, and that's why we follow that criteria. Furthermore, clearly we can specify how those water supplies in NFP 1142 are to be provided. It's right there on the slide. You saw in the fire code that it references the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. Want to apply that? Please do. Please do. 1,500 gallons per minute on any house exceeding 3,600 square feet. We're happy to apply that. That code, I call it the urban code. I've also called it the interurban code many times. Also provides for hydrants. Okay? If this is a wildland urban interface, why are hydrants in the code? If we're directed to use this, please, let's do it. Hydrants, location access approved by the code official. Not the builder, not the developer, not the lawyer. Us. So in our effort, I think I got this idea from Eric Beckman, our effort to continue to try to give resolution to this and move forward, let them start building. I reached out to Mr. Padnos. He responded to me and agreed to come to the station and meet with me. We had a respectable conversation. I brought up our ongoing concerns to Mr. Padnos. Hamilton Grasco Fire Department spent a great deal of time getting information for options for Mr. Padnos to consider. He took those, he was very appreciative. And one of the most important things that Mr. Padnos pointed out was it wasn't so much the cost of a pressurized system, in that he was very turned off by the permit process, including from Eagle. We have to respect that. The thing of it is, we started this 2.5 years ago. There was plenty of time to start this process. And I might add to you that I reached out to Eagle. I reached out to John Baya, engineer, knows the project. I worked with him, with Mr. McClendon, and his comments were, I don't believe this process is as difficult to navigate as Mr. Padnos believes. A couple of points were, he believed there was already a permit process issued under McClendon in 2014, certainly as it's expired. And I asked him why he would be so hard on a developer for wanting to install water mains. He says, well, who said we would? Furthermore, he said if the mains were putting in the right-of-way, it makes the process a lot easier. So there's a lot of choices there. Bottom line is, I encourage Mr. Padnos to reach out to Eagle, and I don't think the process is as overbearing as he felt it is.
So even back to a 2017 memo from the Township's legal counsel to the Planning Commission, it says that the township can't require the two means of access from a public street, but they can still require equivalent for emergency water needs. Again, this was not an exemplary list. It does not require these measures, nor does it preclude the township from requiring other measures. Similar to the consent judgment only prohibits the township and the fire district from requiring a secondary access road. It does not preclude us from requiring our emergency water needs to best fight fire in this development. And most importantly, what was referenced in the previous BOA meeting was the final PUD resolution. It clearly states in line item 15 that this developer still must comply with all other applicable ordinances and fire codes, which would include the 2015 of the International Fire Code as adopted in its entirety by ordinance.
So we requested legal counsel of the fire district to review the documentations once again. Came to the same conclusion, we can't require the developer, the township, fire district can't require the developer to put in a secondary road. We all agree on that. He has to implement alternative safety requirements. There's no specifics in terms of hydrants or how that happens. There's a mention of standpipes, again, not really the correct term, but everyone knew that. But as Chris pointed out, these are just examples. It doesn't preclude him from doing things that are above and beyond the minimum. So we want to make sure that you understood that the township and the fire district have the discretion to impose reasonable amounts of safety features, and certainly it's within our purview to look at that. Again, the legal counsel points out that the resolution is to be developed in accordance with applicable fire codes. We retain complete authority to do that, as mentioned by your legal counsel for the fire district. Our position remains the same. We didn't misinterpret any code. There's been no equivalent method protection proposed. We have dry hydrants in the water. And the provisions of IFC do fully apply. We didn't rubber stamp anything. We don't want that. We've shown you numerous ways that we applied the IFC correctly. Past developments will certainly, in our same rural area, if you want to call it that, we've applied it correctly in those projects that flourished. For such a rural area, why we put in 82,000 feet of water main? So it really contradicts the whole rural thing, if that's what we're focusing on. So we stand by the fact that fire protection approved system must be provided within 400 feet of lot 15, 6736 Saugatuck Beach Road.
And thanks again for all of your time. I know it hasn't been easy for the past several weeks to review all of this information from both parties, but we certainly appreciate the effort, and we'll respect whatever conclusion you come to. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move into questions from the board and discussion among the board. I do first want to start with just focusing on the scope of what's in front of us, which really, if it comes down to the documents, is a 3-page decision from the fire district expressed in the study of the North Shore that outlines their decision-making process and requirements. So that's really what we have to look at as our scope for whether it was applied correctly or not. So let's start with questions that either of you may have for either party. James?
I really don't have anything.
Okay. Eric?
I do. Carl, you mentioned that you were gonna put, or Scott was gonna put an 8-inch dry hydrant, that's the correct word, 400 feet closer to the property. And, I mean, you said right now there's a 6-inch dry hydrant, I was just out there, approximately 800 feet from the property. You just mentioned, well, there's gonna be an 8-inch, 400 feet.
I can explain. What I was saying is that is the issue. That is what is being required. Again, as Chairman Miller pointed out, this is the document we're looking at. And if you review here, it has water supply requirements B, 2 dry hydrants shall be installed within 400 feet of the proposed structure. So we have I want to say this right, we have 2 6-inch hydrants that are within 800 feet.
Right.
I was trying to frame the issue of what are we really comparing. The requirement that the chief is demanding is 2 8-inch within 400 feet.
Right.
So that's the comparison, 2 6 within 800 or 2 8 within 400. Does that clarify? That is, those are not being installed, they're not there, there's not an intention. That was discussing the framing issue between the two
Okay.
alternates. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. I've reviewed all the freaking codes, all the presentations, and I don't have any other questions either. So I think we can move into discussion. I think let's first start with considering the documents that we received since the last meeting, which were documents about the planned unit development that was approved, and then also we received the consent judgment. So let's start with the planned unit development and whether and how that applies to this decision. So I guess, Eric, did you have a chance to review that?
Yeah, I looked through it.
Okay.
The only thing I see is, I mean, there's not a lot that we can do except that was part of that consent judgment.
I think to me, the key thing I saw in that PUD is that lot 15 is not part of it. It starts at 16 and up, so the lot we're considering with 15 is not at all part of the approved PUD. So nothing in the PUD applies.
I missed that.
I found that too, although I've tried repeatedly to find out what lots 1 through 15 are, if they're not part of the PUD, I'm not exactly sure what they are. But they're behind the PUD and the access road goes through the PUD, so I guess the PUD really doesn't, it does affect our decision-making because you have to get through the PUD to get to the fire, so that is difficult, but much of this is difficult, so.
So for the consent judgment, I think that does, as far as I can tell, that does apply to this property as well as the property that's within the approved PUD, but similar to what the chief and Chris were saying, the only thing it doesn't allow is a secondary access road. It does still allow for equivalent means, I can't find the exact language, so, I had it somewhere. So it does allow for, thank you, implementing alternative safety requirements as reasonably imposed by the township, such as a standpipe system or the equivalent for emergency water needs. So if there's nothing in there that I saw that would limit water supply requirements or methods, the only limitation is you can't allow a secondary access road. So that takes care of the two pieces of information that we received since the last meeting. So let's move into, I guess, discussion overall with your thoughts. James, you want to start?
Well, the two things that we received both state that there are safety requirements imposed by the township, and it's implied that the fire chief speaks for the township in matters of safety and firefighting. So, let's be clear that the fire department speaks for the township as they are their representative as far as fire codes and the safety and all of that is concerned. So that we are the the fire department is the spokesperson for the township. I think we need to make that clear.
Eric, you want to?
Well, again, I think the fire chief in this department is the authority having jurisdiction in this case, and not lawyers or...
So the way that I guess, read the codes, the decision, and understood all of that is that, to me, the appellant is really basing his appeal on three grounds, as noted in their original sort of letter. One is a claim that the fire code was incorrectly interpreted. Second is that the provisions of that code don't fully apply. And third is that they propose an equivalent method of protection or safety. I think, though, those really come down to two things, which are mostly what we talked about today. One is that the fire district based its decision on IFC, and the appellate doesn't believe that's the code that should be applied because the property's in a rural area, and they assert that NFPA 1142 is the correct code to apply. Second argument is that using NFPA 1142 results in significantly different and less restrictive standards for water supplies and flow requirements. And they offer a pumper truck and hoses attached to the two existing 6-inch dry hydrants as a solution. So I took those two things sort of separately, the issue of which code applies, and then based on that answer, what's the resulting outcome, sort of separately. And I do agree that with the appellant that the property in question is in a rural area. It does not have an existing adequate and reliable water supply system as noted in IFC and NFPA 1142. There's no municipal water system either on site or in close proximity, and even if the two current dry hydrants could be considered a water supply system, I wouldn't consider them to be adequate or reliable. As noted by the department and its engineers, the plastic pipes could be damaged or clogged by any number of environmental factors, whether it's ice, zebra mussels, plastic bags, and particularly as the area develops from the one unit in question today to more than 40 homes, I don't think we can establish the existing dry hydrants, which are just 6 inches wide made of plastic, as a system for adequate and reliable water protection. So I do agree that NFPA 1142 can be applied based on IFC section B1033, but it is worth noting, as the fire chief noted, that it also allows for International Wildland Urban Interface Code as another option to make decisions on fire protection. So NFPA 1142 isn't the only option. And they define, I looked up the Wildland Urban Interface Code, what that is, and they define that as area where houses meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland vegetation, which makes sense for how you describe this area. And it appears based on maps I could find that the development is in a recognized wildland urban interface area, so that code could potentially also be applied in this instance. So that brings us to the second point. If NFPA 1142 or the Wildland Urban Interface Code are the standard by which decisions should be applied, what are the resulting requirements? The answer is that using either of them does not result in an exact formulaic answer for water supply requirements. I don't think it is that you plug in the house size and you get the exact requirements. You get the minimum requirements, but as the code notes, it rightfully allows for flexibility using the fire code officials' expertise and experience, as well as the unique particularities of the situation to determine requirements. So the appellant used parts of NFPA to note minimum requirements, but section 4.1.3 says that those requirements shall be subject to increase by the authority having jurisdiction to compensate for particular conditions, such as limited fire department resources, extended fire department response time or distance, potential for delayed discovery of fire, limited access in unusual terrain. And I think looking at this property, it's clear that there's limited access due to only one road, which is part of the consent judgment, and there will only be one road, and that there's potential for delayed discovery of fire due to these likely being used primarily as vacation homes that are empty a lot of the time, especially in winter, and that high winds on the lakeshore are an unusual terrain aspect that could contribute to fire spreading quickly. And so, while we're looking just at this one lot today, we do also need to be aware that it's planned to grow to 40 large homes, and I think it'd be short-sighted to design and approve a solution that only narrowly considers one lot. So, in summary, I agree that with the appellant that NFPA 1142 is an appropriate standard to apply to this property. I also think the International Wildland Urban Interface Code would be acceptable, but I don't think they've demonstrated equivalent methods of protection and safety. I also don't think it's our role as the Board of Appeals to determine those specific requirements for water supply, so I think that's up to the fire district and the developer. So with those factors in mind, my opinion is that we should reverse the fire code official's decision regarding Lot 15 based on the determination that either NFPA 1142 or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code should apply, and direct a subsequent review by the fire code official using either of those codes as well as existing consent judgment to develop their requirements. That's my thought.
Okay, so in conclusion of all the reading that I did, the consent judgment, the PUD, and all the options for code enforcement give the fire department jurisdiction. To argue which code is to be used is expensive, time-consuming, and a moot point because it is clear that the decision of the firefighting capabilities of the Saugatuck Township District within which Lot 15 lies is entirely up to the AHJ. That's not this board, it's the fire chief. Any and all code determinations lead to the same result. It would be irresponsible of the township and the fire district to give the building permit to a developer for Lot 15 without a plan for adequate fire protection. All of these things in NFPA 1142 exist in on that property except for possibly hazardous vegetation. I would offer that the fire department could re-review the project under any of these codes at the expense of the developer. And that's how I feel.
Eric, what are your thoughts?
Well, I promise I have not talked to Aaron before I wrote any of this down, but I couldn't agree with him more. As far as the township has adopted the IFC 215 edition, which we know. But I agree with Carl that this is in a rural area, and it is not served by a municipal water supply. So I do agree with you there. But then when we revert to NFPA 1142, it basically says that the authority having jurisdiction basically can tell, is in charge, and he determines what is proper amount of gallons per minute, And I just feel that, you know, the system we have out there that I looked at today is not an acceptable system, and it doesn't look reliable to me. So, lives are at stake here. I think we need to come up with something better, and I think either using the NFPA 1142 or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code is the proper thing to do. And leaving it up to the, you know, the authority having jurisdiction, I think we need to review this again. So I am in agreement that, you know, maybe the code, it is urban, or rural, I'm sorry, and it doesn't have a municipal water supply.
So are we aligned around reversing the decision on these three pieces of paper and asking the Saugatuck Township Fire District to reevaluate using either NFPA 1142 or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code?
I believe that's what we need to do, because what the conclusion of this was the IFC. So I think we need to look at it as either one of those codes. And it's up to the authority having jurisdiction to determine which code fits.
Jane?
I would go along with that, except that we'll come to the same conclusion. So, I mean, they can reevaluate under NFPA 1142 if they want to, but all these things come into play, and the chief knows how to fight a fire. And you know, we've been reminded up here of our responsibilities and our firefighting capabilities and our ability to judge on this. I would question the developer and his attorney as to their abilities in firefighting. I don't think you really know what you're talking about when it comes to firefighting. I don't think you really realize what a hose lay is and how long that takes. And by the time they get your hose lay in, the house will be burned to the ground, because it takes a long time to move these hoses. I tried to pick up hoses yesterday, because I like to know what I'm talking about. And it takes a long time to lay a hose and get it out of the road and make it perfect, and you're going around to bend to get to the lot 15. So I think we should leave it up to the fire department as to how to fight a fire, and not up to a developer and his attorney, with all due respect. So if you want to do this under 1142, that's fine by me, but I'm feeling that the results will be the same.
But if the results are the same, then so be it.
Yeah, so be it.
We did what we were supposed to, and we made a decision based on the information for, as Carl would say, just lot 15. That's all we're thinking about right now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other things going on there, but I think we need to look at lot 15, and I think we agree here that the IFC does not, you know, work. So we need to use the other, either one or the other, or a combination of both. And I think in the paperwork somewhere in here, it said the NFPA is meant to be, you know, molded per the situation. And that area does present some problems, and I think having the authority having jurisdiction knows the area, let him do his job.
You know, rural firefighting does not really apply to this case. It's 44 houses over 6,000 square feet. A lot of houses on a little piece of property that can catch each other on fire when the wind's blowing. And I think we have to protect our firefighters. They come in a limited supply. They don't grow on trees anymore. You don't get the choice of being a cowboy, a fireman, or an astronaut anymore. You have to be something bigger and better than that. So firefighters don't grow on trees. We've had a terrible time recruiting and keeping firefighters. I think we have to be cognizant of that. And even to start fighting a fire, you have to have 3 people there, according to OSHA, to even begin an attack on a fire. So I think you're really limited in saying that you have to set up hose lines that take 4 or 5 people to set up before you start fighting a fire. And I'm sorry, Carl, but I think you don't really know that much about firefighting. So, there you got it.
Okay, I agree with Eric that the decision may end up being the same, but it is important that, at least from a legal perspective, that we apply the right standard. And I do think that there is a good legal case that NFPA 1142 or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code can apply to this particular area. I'm not saying it applies to the whole township, it does not, but to this specific area along the lake shore that is, has one access road and is hard to get to and has limited development, I think it does apply. Are we ready to make a motion to reverse the fire code official's decision and direct a subsequent review by the fire code official using NFP 1142 or the wildland interface guidelines?
I'm fine with that. I mean,
Okay.
you make the motion, I'll second it, exactly what you,
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'd like to make a motion to reverse the fire code official's decision regarding North Shore's appeal with Lot 15 based on the Board of Appeals determination that NFP 1142 and/or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code apply to this property for the reasons set forth in our record of proceedings, and further directing a subsequent review by the fire code official using NFP 1142 or the Wildland Interface Guidelines, as well as the existing consent judgment to make their decision.
I'll second.
Any other discussion?
When they re-review with using 1142, now do we stick with what the chief decides, or are we going to be back here again with an appeal?
So that would be up to the developer.
Okay.
In my opinion, that would be up to him. But
I agree.
we're kind of setting a precedent of where we stand, so if they're not happy with that, they know where we stand.
Any other discussion? Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Can I reread the motion to make sure I typed everything as
Yeah.
fast as you
It
said
was long, sorry.
Motion by Miller, second by Beckman, to reverse the fire code official's decision for Lot 15 based on the determination that NFPA 1142 or the International Wildland Urban Interface Code does apply based on the minutes of these proceedings, and direct the fire code official to re-review the project using either of these codes.
You're a good typer.
Okay. Okay. Miller,
Yes.
Beckman,
Yes.
and Verplain.
Yeah.
Okay, where's my agenda go? We have no new business, so we'll move into public comments for a limit of 3 minutes. So any public comments? Okay. Any Board of Appeal member comments?